Hey, it's Matt Sager, and you've no doubt noticed a major item of news has come and largely gone, and I haven't yet addressed it on my podcast, and I feel like I ought to say something about it, late to the party though I may be. To my mind, there have been much more serious items. Ones that warrant more of my attention, ones that make this news, seismic though it may be within the comics industry. It's not really huge news at a time when there's a raging global pandemic. There are worldwide protests finally addressing massive systemic racism and inequality in America and around the world. And to me, that's timely. That's important. And it's also stuff that, generally speaking, I'm going to start another podcast to talk about, but it's not the kind of stuff you're used to, at least on this podcast, hearing from me. So that will be a topic for another day. The comics related news item, which I've missed and which I'm going to talk about a little bit today, really world shifting. And again, I'm so late to the party that I don't know quite what I've got to add to this conversation other than my take on it, what little experience I have with the parties involved. And I think that there's a lot of hysteria that you've heard from both sides of this issue that I actually think is probably a lot of drama over nothing. And I think the explanation for this is actually much more simple than anyone is making it out to be. The news item to which I'm referring is DC Comics' separation from Diamond Comics distribution. Now, you might think it's a bit odd that one comics company pulling away from a distributor would be such a major news item, but Diamond has had a stranglehold on comics, collectibles, everything you see when you enter a comic store. For about 30 years now, they have been the sole distributor of all comic store related items, from comics to Funko Pop toys, to action figures, to models. They look, in a country that was not as broken as ours has been these past 30 years, this would be a clear case of a monopoly. The Justice Department would have broken up Diamond. That's my personal opinion. The idea that you cannot open a store that caters to this market without having a Diamond account always struck me as super shady. You can open a retail store of any sort other than comics and have your pick of distributors. More often than not, you would need several distributors because you'd pick one for your books, one for your candies, one for milk and soda. If, say, you were an airport, Hudson News store. That is the typical retail model. Diamond, however, has a complete stranglehold on comics. And in fact, I will share an anecdote that has more bearing on this story than it might seem at first. There was a time in the early 2000s when, sort of at loose ends with what I wanted to do with my life, coming out of radio, finding myself disaffected and frustrated at the voiceover industry and how it was treating me, I thought about dipping my toe into various other things. One of them being, everyone had this crazy idea at the time, selling crap on eBay, Amazon, etc. And I attempted to open a Diamond account because that's what you have to do if you're going to sell this stuff. It was a nightmare trying to deal with my sales rep. We established what little amount of volume I would be purchasing, and yet still they wanted me to give something like $1 million in collateral to prove I was worth their time. And so I thought, screw this. I'm not opening a retail store. I learned about DCBS, which I think stands for Discount Comic Book Service, something like that. And they essentially sold comics to customers at Diamond or better prices. Better cover price, better shipping condition than what I'd seen from Diamond. And I started buying from them. And for a couple of months, I was getting like 5 issues of this, 7 issues of that. And to their credit, sort of, acknowledging Diamond's stranglehold on the industry, I got a call from them one day saying, "We've Googled you, and it looks like you might be selling the stuff you're buying." And I said, "Oh, yeah, I am." They said, "Well, we are not a distributor. If you want to sell, you've got to go through Diamond," which I thought was bullshit. Not in that it was a lie, but in that what a messed up world in which you've got to be in business with this one entity or you can't do business with comics. But I thought it was to DCBS's credit that they weren't trying to be some sort of illegitimate distributor themselves. Even though it hurt me, the little guy, I was impressed as much as I was aggravated that DCBS was adhering to their own contract with Diamond. And the secret contract that sort of all comics retailers have, which is that we've got Diamond, and if we didn't have them, we'd have to shut down, because that's just the way things are. And I don't mind telling you that I know several retailers who at the time were very much simpatico with me and were furious at Diamond, felt they were mistreated terribly, felt that they were often shipped way too many copies of a book. When they'd order 2, they'd receive 30. And they would say, well, on the one hand, this is a gift with purchase, but on the other hand, we received these books for free, but we were charged the weight of freight of them. So Diamond just effed us for a bunch of books we won't be able to move. This does not seem like a mistake because it seems to happen every couple of months, always with books that don't sell. I remember hearing, and I've read about this since DC's separation from Diamond. It's mentioned in an article in The Beat that when Diamond set up their digital pull box system, many retailers believed, and we don't know that they're wrong, that Diamond was attempting to make an end run around the stores and steal the store's customer for what was eventually going to be simply a Diamond worldwide market. That you would go to diamond.com, say, and they'd have harvested all your information as a customer from these comic stores to whom they'd sold comics, and that they were planning to undercut the retailer completely. There's no reason to doubt that. The bottom line is when you've got to do business with Diamond on their terms, however shitty they may be, to open up a store, you're not really an independent business owner at all. You are, and I've heard this phrase used repeatedly since DC made the move to pull out of Diamond, you're a Diamond Comics franchisee. I don't know Steve Jeppy, the owner. Apparently, many old school comics retailers do know, love, and feel a great loyalty to him, and that's fine. That doesn't change the fact, however, that if you want to open a store, if you've got to do business with Diamond, and if they use strong-arm tactics, and you don't really have any say in the matter, because if you've got a problem with Diamond, you've got to shut down, then yes, all comic stores up to this point have been nothing short of Diamond Comics franchisees. Nothing wrong with being a franchisee. If you want to do that, if you've got the money and the wherewithal to say buy a Dunkin' Donuts, there's nothing wrong with doing that. But if you have a dream of opening a comic store and you find yourself essentially enslaved to Diamond distributors, I don't know. Right now, I'm hearing a lot of people saying, well, at least that was the devil we know. Now things are really screwy because DC Comics has withdrawn from Diamond. Now, there are many reasons why. For one thing, when this pandemic first hit, Diamond reacted in a way that shocked retailers, fans, and pretty much anyone who read about how they reacted. It was dramatic. It revealed a lot about their business, about its solvency or lack thereof, and about just how they feel toward their business partners, both retailers and publishers. So New Comics Day stopped happening pretty much immediately. Once or twice on this podcast, I've done a New to You Comic Book Day review, in which I've gone back and talked about a comic of old because it seemed as though New Comic Book Day would never resume. Not simply because of the pandemic and because of stores shutting down temporarily due to state-mandated orders of anything but essential businesses remaining open. And look, I love comics. They're certainly not an essential business. So many stores shut down temporarily. Many artists and writers at various companies were given a pencils down order. So sure, things paused. Diamond, however, did more than shut down. They furloughed a shocking number of employees right away, fired a shocking number right away, and then went on to reach out to their partners at publishers, Marvel, DC, Boom, Image, IDW, and say, hey, we'd love to pay you the money we owe you for books we've already shipped and orders that are coming in, but we're not going to. In some cases, we can't. In other cases, we sort of can, but we're so close to insolvency after 2 weeks that we simply cannot afford to pay you. We will set up payment plans in which we pay you like 1/100th of what we owe you for services and goods already delivered. And we will continue to pay you in installments, the size of which we can't even promise we'll adhere to going forward because we are flat broke. We had nothing in the bank. We were surviving week to week, and we didn't seem to feel it necessary to share this information with you, you publishers or the stores who are doing business with us, who are dependent on us for their survival. We didn't feel it necessary that anyone know we're essentially a cash-on-hand business ready to shut down at a moment's notice because we are not doing our books. We have not saved any money. We are not ready for any kind of crisis. So if we owe you something, get ready because we may or may not pay you. We may or may not simply declare bankruptcy, and you may have to wait years and years and years and get a fraction of what you're owed once we finally dissolve. They were really clear about this. And to many publishers, that was a shock. It hurt publishers much more than it did retailers. However, any retailer with a bit of sense ought to have been pretty alarmed that their business is dependent upon a distributor with no business model, with no business sense, with no money on hand, that could collapse at any moment in a time of crisis. Then weeks went by. DC began circumventing Diamond, doing digital first releases, and Diamond suddenly realized, the world could move on without us. So we're going to get really involved now and do Zoom conferences with retailers to assuage their fears. We're going to get on YouTube with retailers who are deeply partisan loyal to us. Talk about what a great company we are, and started an initiative called Back the Comeback, in which when comics finally do ship, when we finally get our act together and pay the publishers what they're owed, and then get that product to the retailers, they will ship with a Comics Code style stamp saying Back the Comeback. This is real. Steve Geppi was very proud and excited about this Back the Comeback nonsense, in which a gigantic piss-colored Comics Code Authority shaped stamp invoking the Comics Code Authority, essentially the McCarthyist self-censorship that comics enforced upon themselves for 6 decades in the wake of a Senate subcommittee hearing in the 1950s in which rabid right-wing demagogues tried to shut down the comic book industry. And the comic industry said, no, please, we don't want to be shut down. We will enforce ourselves. We're going to set up the Comics Code Authority. They'll be kissing with no tongue, no same-sex relationships, very little racial content. We won't ever use the word vampire without first saying living. So we can have Morbius, who's a scientist who acts like a vampire, but we won't ever actually use the word undead or use the word vampire. We're going to treat a business that caters mostly to 30 to 50-year-olds and not let there be content that an 8-year-old couldn't consume. We are going to self-censor. Steve Geppi thought that if we invoked that, along with a Back the Comeback slogan, the idea being that customers would be so happy that stores were back open and so eager as collectors, because this entire setup, the ability to stop shipping to stores, to stop paying publishers, is dependent on the idea of a rabid collector fan base that can't survive without their weekly fix of comics, that is so desperately loyal to any one comics distributor, store, publisher. The idea would be that once COVID cleared and people were ready to go back to their stores, they would buy every comic with a Back the Comeback sticker on it. If it was from a publisher they didn't like, if it was a comic they didn't like, they would want, Geppi said, to complete their collection of all the post-COVID comics. And so this is how they would bring people back to the stores, with a big sticker that said Back the Comeback. Very silly. And DC had already, much to the chagrin of retailers, who for some reason were now embracing Diamond as, again, the devil they knew. They thought it was shocking and a betrayal. And oh my gosh, DC is shipping comics on Tuesday. Everybody knows new comics ship Wednesday. Why are they rocking the boat? We're all in this together, right? We all have to adhere to the same set of rules. Rules set up not by us, but rules we've all agreed to follow because we're idiots? We're slaves to Steve Geppi and Diamond? It's not clear. But once the crisis began to pass and stores began to reopen, and this idiotic Back the Comeback initiative started to roll out, DC made it official. We're not getting back into bed with Diamond. We are going to continue to use the distributors we used during this crisis, which were, in fact, offshoots, new distributors that they helped create, one of which involved Discount Comic Book Service, DCBS, the other of which was done with the help of and in conjunction with Midtown Comics. So yeah, I can see why some retailers would be concerned that, in a manner of speaking, it could be construed that they are now, from this day forward, when they want to sell DC Comics, they've got to enrich and do business with and play by the terms of companies that are sort of their competitor. Midtown is a giant comics retail behemoth, and DCBS is a wonderful online comics distributor. Up till now, just to individuals, they refused, as I said, to be a distributor to someone like me, back when I thought, hey, maybe I'll sell comics like an idiot in like 2005 for 5 minutes. Now they are a distributor. And depending on which coast you are in the US, one is called Lunar, one's got another name, but essentially they're Midtown and DCBS, and I believe Midtown services the East Coast and DCBS services the West Coast. And yes, you do have to open a new distributor account, which might be a headache. You might be so used to dealing only with Diamond that you've got to make adjustments now. You've got 2 distributors. And DC, for their part, is so big a publisher that you can't not open a new account. If you've got a comic store, you've got to sell DC Comics, or you're forgoing Batman, you're forgoing Superman, you're forgoing the Justice League. So comic retailers continue to need to play by other people's rules, but frankly, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world to have two distributors. Furthermore, I don't think this is a shiv in the back. This is the sort of hyperbolic language I've been hearing about this, that it's a shiv in the back to retailers and or a shiv in the back of Diamond Distributors and their president, Steve Geppi. I think this might have been in the works long before the pandemic. I think this has been in the works since AT&T acquired Time Warner, parent company of DC Comics. I think they came on board, looked at the distribution model, whereby they've got to do business with this not ideal distributor who does not treat them particularly well, who charges publishers a great deal, who shortchanges retailers, and who does not help you get into more places. Like you might have noticed that DC Comics has branched out into Walmart, where they've got Walmart exclusives of Batman, Superman, and others. Diamond didn't help them with that. They couldn't. They had to go through another distributor. And AT&T, when there are mergers like this, they always look at what fat they can trim. And Diamond Distributors was a pretty heavy yoke. They continue to be around the neck of many publishers. And AT&T comes in, and when they make a decision like this, it's not based on emotion. They're not trying to stab somebody in the back, nor do they care about anyone's feelings. They need to make quick business decisions to justify even keeping DC Comics as an imprint. They could just as easily have licensed these characters out to another comics publisher and scrapped DC entirely. DC needed to prove that they were a cash-generating business. AT&T needed to believe that, or why not scrap DC entirely? And so one of the reasons I believe they kept DC intact, because they're not moving a ton of comics. I hope I'm not breaking some terrible news to you. Just like Marvel at Disney, comics are a massive loss leader for Time Warner and now for AT&T. And part of that loss is doing business with Diamond, who is an unreliable, rather expensive business partner. I think the pandemic may have hastened or given us an early look at this idea, caused it perhaps to unfurl earlier than it would have. But I don't think it's even caused by the pandemic, this divorce of Diamond and DC Comics. I think it was in the works already. Otherwise, much as I want to give credit to DC Comics for how well they reacted to this pandemic and the sudden shock and loss of business, why were they so much more agile, so ready, so able to set up these new distributors at a moment's notice where Marvel didn't seem to even be trying? Marvel being really the only other comic book publisher of this size. I think it was because they'd been testing and preparing for this change for a long, long time, since at least the acquisition by AT&T. That said, my understanding is Steve Geppi is a really nice guy, that he's done a lot of favors for a lot of retailers. Some of these favors, as I've been reading about them, I have no doubt you've been following the news, and if not, a simple Google search of Diamond and DC Comics will lead you to lots and lots of articles with all sorts of viewpoints on the subject. But some of these deals involved really big loans to retailers, loans which it was expected would mean these retailers would remain Diamond partisans. That's a little bit heavy-handed to me. Yeah, sure, absolutely, I want a loan if I need one, but I don't want that loan to mean I am indebted to the extent that I have to conduct all elements of my business according to the terms laid out by my sole distributor. That feels thuggish to me. And again, any one distributor having complete control over an entire industry, one as thriving as comics attempts to be, it's a weird time. Comic stores have not been doing very well. Comics themselves have not been selling very well. Even as superhero-based movies and TV shows have been among the biggest earners in the world. It's a weird time. And if you want to get in on the intellectual property that started it all, or if you just had a childhood dream of one day owning a comic store, you got to deal with Steve Geppi and Diamond. And now, DC feels differently. This may start off a wave of other publishers saying, hey, you know what? We're going to go through a different distributor. And yes, that might cause headaches for retailers. And now that DC has broken away from Wednesday as being the only day in which new comics can be released, maybe Marvel will start releasing new titles Mondays or Thursday. And retailers ought to be ready for this. It's not as chaotic as it sounds. Businesses tend to work this way. They don't tend to only release product on one day of the week and only deal with one distributor. It is weird that Diamond has had this stranglehold for so long. That's my opinion. As someone who's neither a retailer nor a publisher, that's my take. Yours may very well vary, especially if you are a retailer or if you work in comics publishing. So whatever your take on this, I welcome it. Please do leave a comment. Also, if you'd like to follow me on social media, there are links in the episode description as to how you can do that, as well as to how you can support this podcast. And if you're checking this out on YouTube, please like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications. And if you're listening on a podcast network, I'd love it if you subscribe there as well. Reviews are always welcome. Thanks a lot, and I will talk with you soon.